you talking about?
I had no idea. I felt so bad after you told me.
You trashed the public comment cards?
People were talking. I didn't know that.
You haven't been doing that the last year and a half? Were you throwing them away for the last year and a half?
So they all use it, and I did that, and they just go to the recycling. Oh,
For the last year and a half?
and then she'll eat me.
Yeah.
Thanks a
No, it's okay. I mean,
for mentoring you guys.
well, I've never been on the same committee as you, or on a committee that you chaired.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Land Use Committee meeting of June 25th, 2018. I'm Katie Tang, chair of this committee. To my right is Vice Chair Supervisor Jane Kim, and to my left is Supervisor Asha Safai. Our clerk is John Carroll today, and from SFGov TV, we'd like to thank Kalina Mendoza and Jesse Larson. Mr. Clerk, do we have any announcements before us?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Please make sure to silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the July 10th Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
Thank you. Can you please call item 1, please?
Agenda item number 1 is a resolution changing the name of South Street between 3rd Street and Terry A. Francois Boulevard in Mission Bay South to Warriors Way in recognition of the Golden State Warriors basketball team's contribution to the San Francisco Bay Area and the city and county.
Thank you very much, and I will call on Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I just want to thank colleagues for hearing this item today in the midst of budget craziness. The resolution before us is to rename South Street in Mission Bay to Warriors Way. For those who are unfamiliar with the street, it's the block. It's a very short block adjacent to the Chase Center, which is in construction today. And the proposed street renaming is a special way to recognize and welcome the Warriors team to San Francisco and the Mission Bay neighborhood and to their ongoing and continuing contributions to the city, both on and off the court. I also want to note that the selected street for renaming was recently built, so it bears no historic or cultural connection to the Mission Bay neighborhood. And the proposed renaming was presented to and is supported by UCSF, the Mission Bay Citizens Advisory Committee, as well as the South Beach Rincon Mission Bay Neighborhood Association. So I do want to thank the project sponsor for doing all of the outreach to our neighborhood and community organizations before bringing this before the Board of Supervisors. I'm proud to co-sponsor this with the Mayor's Office, and we'll be asking for your support today. Before that, we do have a brief presentation, if needed, by committee members from Public Works. We have Javier Rivera, a project manager of DPW BSM, to speak to the process, and we also have David Kelly, general counsel to the Warriors, as well as VP of basketball management. So colleagues, would you like to hear from them? Any questions from them? Okay, so let's bring them both up.
We'll give them an opportunity to speak, but I think, it is pretty straightforward, but if they're here, then
why don't
we'll
we
have
bring
you come
up
on
just Mr. Kelly from the Warriors then, and if there are any questions from Public Works staff, we can leave that for questions. Does that make sense? Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. Happy to answer any questions. As Supervisor Kim noted, this is supported by the Mission Bay Citizens Advisory Committee, by our neighbors, UCSF, and we are very pleased to have this before the committee here today.
Okay. All right.
Any other questions on the process, or there's really not a lot of history here because it's a new street.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Kelly. Thank you also to Mr. Rivera for being here to answer any questions. So at this time, we can open up for public comment.
All right. So public comment is open for item 1. Please come on up if you'd like to speak. No one? Okay. Last call. All right. Public comment is closed for item 1. All right, colleagues, if we can get a motion.
Colleagues, I'd like to make a motion to move this forward with recommendation to the full board.
Okay, so we'll do that with positive recommendation to the full board without objection. All right, thank you very much. Item 2, please.
Agenda item number 2 is an ordinance amending the planning code to permit, as of right, public parking lot uses where the parcel is located in both the Glen Park Neighborhood Commercial Transit District and RH2 zoning districts. The property has been used as a public parking lot for the past 10 years without the benefit of a permit, and the adjoining RH2 parcel is no larger than 40 feet by 110 feet. Affirming the Planning Department's determination under the California Environmental Quality Act, making findings of consistency with the general plan and the 8 priority policies of Planning Code Section 101.1, and making public findings of public necessity, convenience, and welfare pursuant to Planning Code Section 302.
Thank you very much. And I think we were supposed to have Colden Lambright here, or someone from Supervisor Sheehy's office. Just a moment. Okay. Maybe we can go to planning staff report. Okay. Okay. Oh, actually, never mind. Sorry. We are joined by Supervisor Jeff Sheehy now. Since it's his item, I will give him a time to say a few remarks first.
So what we're trying to do here is actually create a scenario where we can actually increase housing in Glen Park. We have a parking lot that has existed for over 40 years. It was sold to actually the father of the family and his partner as a parking lot. And the situation we're in now is that if the family is unable to regularize this, and this is a dirt parking lot that does not have, no one charges for it now. It's used for some BART commuters, it's used for people stopping at the local merchants, and it's really only a handful of people actually know that there's no enforcement, no one's ever been towed, even though it's posted. And so when the family's father passed away, well, first one of the owners sold to the family, and then the family's father passed away. And now the property really is a source of income in the business, because it exists right now as a commercial space, is an income for the mother. The family has no existing plans to develop. There really aren't the resources to start development. Long range, the family has indicated they would like to develop housing here. It's catty corner from BART. You can imagine if they use Home SF, the great piece of Disney bonus legislation, that they could really turn this into a nice housing project that would include certainly affordable housing. But in order to get there, what we thought is that we could regularize the parking lot for a period of 6 years. So this legislation sunsets in 6 years. The family has assured me that over that period of 6 years, this new source of income can be used to start the planning to turn that property into housing, which it currently is not. We know we have a housing crisis in this city, that the ability to convert that lot into housing is desperately needed, but we're looking at real economic circumstances for the family where the family cannot make that transition in the near term because there simply aren't resources. And the point at which it might eventually be developed could be, 10 years from now. There is no real impetus or resources to drive that forward. By allowing the parking lot for a definitive period of time, that gives the resources to start the planning, and then by having it revert back to not being parking at the end of 6 years, there's an economic incentive to develop the lot. The other point is that if that lot is not allowed to be normalized, the family has no option but to fence it off. And that will cause, for some businesses, a near catastrophic loss of parking. That is parking that almost everybody in the community knows you can park at. If you want to go pick up burritos at La Corneta, or go across the street and do some grocery shopping at Canyon Market, or eat at Giuliana's or La Petite Laurent or Manzoni's or any of the restaurants. Last minute shopping, dry cleaners pick up. Everybody knows that that lot is a place where people in the neighborhood can stop in. If you look at Glen Park as a commercial district, it is largely, if not solely, sustained by people in the neighborhood. So this is not like other commercial districts in my district where you have a significant influx of people from outside the district. So this is really driven by people in the neighborhood, and cutting off this parking will make it difficult for people who live, because this is kind of, if you actually know the neighborhood, this kind of sits at the bottom of several hills, and people just will not be able to come down if they don't have the parking. With that 6-year time frame, I think we'll be able to figure out, the parking issues as they exist, and be able to make adjustments for the community as the 6 years clock ticks. But to suddenly take away the parking, I think, would be catastrophic for local businesses. So I think this is kind of a very local, neighborhoody, win-win-win situation that we set up that also will benefit the city as a whole, because that will open that piece of real estate right catty corner for BART up for significant development if we can just get this clock started with this piece of legislation, time limited to 6 years. So I hope you'll be able to support it.
Thank you, Supervisor Sheehy. And next, we will go to Planning Department staff report.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. The Planning Commission heard this item on June 7th of this year and voted unanimously to disapprove the proposed ordinance. The Commission received 37 letters from the public and heard testimony from 2 members of the public at the hearing. All were in opposition to the legislation. While the Commission recognizes that this property had been used as a public parking lot for several decades without the benefit of a permit, the proposed ordinance is not consistent with the Glen Park plan. Further, the property's proximity to the Glen Park BART station makes it more suitable for housing and mixed-use development. Several of the letter speakers, as well as the commissioner, stated they would be supportive of a future proposal to change the parcel zoning so that it was entirely within the Glen Park NCT, and therefore have the ability to establish a legal parking lot for a temporary period of 5 years. The legislation heard by the commission did not place a time limit on the parking lot use. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, questions? Oh, Supervisor Kim?
Thank you, and this can be questions to either planning staff or to Supervisor Sheehy. The original proposed ordinance that I read didn't have the sunset date. Now it does, so I feel a lot more comfortable supporting it with a sunset. I don't have strong feelings about 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. I know those are the number of years on the table. I'd love to hear planning's feedback on what would be a reasonable amount of time for the current owners of the site to work with the planning department on a potential development project that would be more in lines with what planning feels is the best and highest use of the site, mixed use housing, which I agree with. That's the first question. And then the second question is, how would we enforce it if it does sunset in 5, 6, or 7 years? Is there something that we can put into the ordinance to ensure enforcement? Can we put some type of notice of restriction on the deed to ensure that it does not remain a parking lot into the future? Because I agree that that's not the best and highest use of this parcel. So what are some things that we can do on the back end?
Those are all really good questions. The first part, how long, the Glen Park NCT allows parking lots on a temporary basis for what I believe is 3 years. The commission during their hearing had mentioned 5 years. I'm not sure if we have a difference between 5 or 6. It seems, splitting hairs at that point. The way we normally sunset a parking lot is it's through a conditional use authorization. So part of the condition is that it's approved, but only for 3 years or only for 5 years. So this would make the parking lot as of right. I suppose we would have to put a notice of special restriction on the property or some sort of marker on the permit to indicate that. I'm not sure of the mechanics, but I'm sure there's a way to do it.
So just the way I'm reading the amendment that Supervisor Sheehy has inserted at the end, it states, unless reenacted, this note shall expire by operation of law 72 months after the effective date of the ordinance. Upon its expiration, the city attorney is authorized to take steps to remove this note from the planning code.
So I think that just allows the ordinance or the language to come out of the planning code. It doesn't stop the use from operating. So there would, just so we don't, we can change the planning code. Someone's operating a restaurant in a neighborhood and all of a sudden we say restaurants are not permitted in this neighborhood. That doesn't make the restaurant go out of business. So there needs to be some sort of explicit caveat in the code that says such parking lot can only operate for a period of so many years.
And that's typically done through a CU. Have you ever seen it done through this vehicle?
No, I haven't.
Okay, because I think one of the concerns is that the project sponsor would not get the CU if it went through that process. And by the way, I don't want a parking lot on this parcel. I don't think anyone on this committee does. But I do think it's reasonable to give the project sponsor time to figure out what to develop on site. And that does, I think, typically take 5 years. I think that's a pretty good amount of time to do that work. And it doesn't hurt if you're not already a developer with a deep pocket to start amassing some returns on the investment to help fund the development process.
Right.
So would your suggestion then be for us to make this a CU? It's already a CU on the NCT, right?
It's
But
already
it's-
CU in the NCT. You can either
They
make it a CU
for the
or
RH2 parcel.
put language in it that says such parking lot can only operate for a period of 6 years and must record a notice of special restriction on the property to indicate that. I mean, that's the time period of that they're allowed to operate the parking lot.
Supervisor Safai?
Thank you. I have a few questions. I actually have a lot of familiarity with this lot since it borders both of our districts. I actually frequent this area all the time. So one of the things that I'm thinking about is I think about a lot of the different commercial corridors throughout our city. Particularly, I'm thinking about the Mission right now. A lot of the properties have been they've been taken, and there's a little bit of reuse in them. Some of the old theaters, they've turned the rear of their old theaters into parking lots, and there is. I am for housing in almost every instance, but I am also for the ability for these small businesses to have support. I, for one, when I do shopping in that area, I have to drive over there to do some grocery shopping, or if we're going to some of the restaurants. So I think that having some parking, and there is no parking in that area, and then certainly you don't want to take parking away from the residents and others, and there is a certain amount of metered parking. So I am for the ability for this to play itself out over a 6-year period. And I think that that's good, but I also think that we shouldn't lose sight in the conversation that, and I think it would be good to hear from some of the merchants. I see some of them here today, and maybe the family itself, there is a certain amount of value for having this lot, and I wouldn't certainly want to put too much restrictions on that ability. I like the idea of allowing this to go through the process and allowing them to have the idea of coming back and using this as a potential development site. In a perfect kind of planning world, yes, this is a really great spot to develop into some transit-oriented development. But at the same time, I would probably even push for there to be parking and housing on the same spot if it were possible, not necessarily for the residents, but also to support some of the merchants that are there in the area. So I actually like the proposal that we have in front of us today, and I wouldn't want to put more restrictions on that, personally.
Okay, thanks, Supervisor Safai. And, you know, for myself, just looking at the parcel, having been there, haven't parked there myself, but it's a very interesting shaped piece of property, and frankly, even if you were to be able to build housing, it would take a little bit of, I think, probably creativity in terms of how you would structure it. But I would agree with Supervisor Sheehy that putting the time frame on this would be helpful for the people who own the property so that they can actually begin looking into how they can develop housing there. So, I mean, I think I agree with most of the points said here today. So whatever is the best language for us to put in there for that time frame, as well as, I don't know how Supervisor Sheehy feels about the recording issue that Mr. Starr brought up.
Well, first, a couple of points. So the 6 years, partially that was to align with the 5-year request. What people don't recognize is that is a dirt lot. So before they do anything with it, they need to pave it and light it and make it safe, because currently it's not that safe. We get a lot of car break-ins there. So that's why 6, because you can't really do 5.5, you know, and so they wouldn't get a real 5 if we said 5. I think it really, just to be totally parochial, it's very important to me to get this done before I leave. And I'm not sure that we have a drafted amendment that we could introduce today that beyond what is already in the legislation. And so that would delay this legislation. We're looking at you, yes.
Sure,
Thank you.
yeah, Deputy City Attorney John Givner. I understand the direction that you're discussing. If it's the committee's will, we can work with planning on adding a sentence or proposed amendment for tomorrow, because this will be in committee at the board tomorrow if it comes out as a committee report. You could make that amendment tomorrow, clarifying the mechanism for the sunset. and still pass it on first reading tomorrow.
But I guess I still have a question. If there was a desire as part of the development to continue to have parking, would that amendment do away with the ability to have parking? I don't know. 5 years from now, there may just be a scooter parking lot that we need. I'm actually not joking, you know, the way that transportation is changing. But if there was, would that make it just impossible for there to be parking after 6 years?
Well, if they're developing a building with units and commercial in it, they can usually add parking. Glen Park has a maximum parking requirement, so they can only do so much, whereas RH2 has a minimum parking, but the property should really be rezoned to Glen Park NCT if they want to develop it as housing. That will allow them to much more flexibility, have a lot more units, things like that.
And that costs money, right?
To rezone it, well, if a supervisor proposes it, no, it doesn't. But if they do, yes, it does.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about a process. I just feel like that that if we just say we want this to be housing, that does not compel them to do anything with that property. And I think that's what's kind of being missed here is that, well, we want housing there, and yet we're not willing to provide any incentives to help what is not, and where this family is not. They're not developers. And so what I'm trying to do is to expedite the process of getting housing there where we desperately need it by starting a clock. And I just, in some way, I just think planning has said, well, we want housing and that's what should be there. And I don't think anybody disagrees with that, but without providing any sort of incentives to the family or any sort of timeline to get this done. So in my mind, if we could just get this to take place, I think everybody would have what they want.
If I may,
Mr.
through the
Stark.
chair, I wasn't suggesting that you not go forward with the parking lot and allowing that happen. I'm just saying in 5-7 years, the entire parcel should be rezoned to Glen Park NCT. It would make the development much better and a lot easier to do. Having it split between RH2 and Glen Park NCT is a very difficult way to develop a lot. That was my only point with that.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim?
I just wanted to go back to the deed restriction, notice of deed restriction. That is something that would be really important to me in order to move this forward. I do think that the project sponsor or the landowner should have time. 6 years is fine to be able to go through a process, and during that time, be able to generate additional revenue by making it a managed parking lot. I support both of those things. What I want to ensure is that this isn't a grandfathered use after 6 years and it remains a parking lot forever, and there's no incentive for them to develop anything else on that site because they have a permanent use zoning because they were grandfathered in even after it's, I guess, removed from the planning code. So I prefer the CU route, but I understand that there's a little bit of nervousness that the Planning Commission might not grant it. I think at minimum we should have a notice of deed restriction to ensure that the site keeps moving forward, that they're actually incentivized to brainstorm and work with planning around a different type of project. And so my hope is that this is a temporary use. I'm fine with the project including parking with their other development, of course, but I don't want this to remain a parking lot in a neighborhood that is in a parcel that's so close to BART. I just think that would be incredibly unfortunate. And so if we don't put that in there, I'm worried that it's going to remain a parking lot.
Supervisor Sheehy.
If we could vote this out today, I'm happy to introduce an amendment as we discussed with Mr. Givner tomorrow to put that deed restriction in place. So I have no objection. If he can draft it, if that makes it, I'm with you on that.
Okay,
So.
and I would love for it to get out while Supervisor Sheehy is here. So I'm happy to, help expedite that.
Okay, great. Thank you. And any other questions, comments, or other speakers you have? If not, then we'll open up item 2 to public comment. So if you would like to speak, please come on up.
I stipulate to what you're talking about. And the best way to give momentum and incentive to the owner of this property, use the blueprint and the diagrams and the schematic that's used to Mission Rock. Apply that schematic with the amount of footage that you have on that property, and as far as the land pertaining to keeping a parking lot, make that ground level a parking lot, and overhead pertaining to your height rules and regulations, build affordable housing at the maximum level of height. Use Mission Rock as an example, as an incentive to the owners of the property, and give them a more positive outlook on developing that property for housing. And as far as affordable housing is concerned, follow the rules and regulations of Mission Rocks that says that 15% of the overall apartments that's built in the complex is supposed to be for low-income and very low-income people, the very set of people that's economically disadvantaged, got a combination of both mental and physical disability, that's homeless and out in the street, that need housing. Then the remaining of the apartment unit complex is for higher income bracket people pertaining to market rate. Is that clear? And a good example of what I'm talking about, Mission Rock has 1,500 apartment unit complexes. The instructions say 15% is supposed to be for low and low income bracket income people. That means 225 of those apartments is supposed to be for low income people. That page is not being followed by the rules and regulations of that agreement. So that has to be corrected, and I'm not letting that go. But I want that model pertaining to Mission Rock to be used to this project here in order to provide affordable housing for all income brackets. Sincerely.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on item 2? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed. All right, so Supervisor Sheehy unfortunately had to run back to Budget Committee, but as he stated on the record, it sounds like he is willing to work with our City Attorney's Office for an amendment tomorrow at the full board. But for the time being, it's requested that this item be sent to the full board with positive recommendation as a committee report. So does anyone want to make a motion on that then?
I'd make a motion to move to send this to the full board with positive recommendation.
As a committee report?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, and we'll do that without objection. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Clerk, if you could please call items 3 through 5 together.
Agenda item number 3 is an ordinance amending the general plan in connection with revisions to the Candlestick Point and Hunters Point Shipyard Phase 2 project in order to facilitate redevelopment, adopting findings under the California Environmental Quality Act, making findings of consistency with the general plan and the 8 priority policies of Section 101.1 of the Planning Code, making findings of public convenience, necessity, and welfare under Planning Code Section 340. Agenda item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning code by amending the zoning map sheets to remove assessor's parcel block number 4991, lot number 276, from the Candlestick Point Activity Node Special Use District and the CP Height and Bulk District, adopting appropriate findings and making findings of consistency with the general plan and the 8 priority policies, as well as Planning Code Section 302. And agenda item number 5 is a resolution of the Board of Supervisors acting in its capacity as a successor agency to the former redevelopment agency of the city and county, approving an amendment to the below market rate housing plan for the Candlestick Point Hunters Point Shipyard Phase 2 project in the Hunters Point Shipyard redevelopment project area and Bayview Hunters Point redevelopment project area, subject to Oversight Board and California Department of Finance approval and making environmental findings.
Thank you very much. And before we begin, I wanted to call on Supervisor Cohen's office as one of the co-sponsors of these 3 items. Brittany Chiquata, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to speak briefly about these items. So the items before you today, as the clerk mentioned, provide some modest tweaks to Phase 2 of the Hunters Point Shipyard redevelopment plan. And I emphasize that they're minor because the developer, Five Point, and the Office of Community Investment and Infrastructure, OCII, have worked very hard to ensure that the proposed changes do not trigger an environmental impact review. And so, as you'll hear from Planning and OCII staff this afternoon, we're updating the number of units in affordable housing in Phase 2 of the development plan and really just giving each development a bit more flexibility in Phase 2. You may have seen the economic impact report that was released from the Controller's Office this morning, which highlighted the 4 major changes that are happening, including rezoning to accommodate revised street grade, rearrangement of development blocks, reconfiguration of open space, and revised land use. And so Supervisor Cohen is currently chairing the Budget Committee, which is why she's not here herself to give an introduction and give her support for these items, but she asks that you send it to tomorrow's board meeting as a committee report, positive recommendation. And OCII, and planning are all here for any questions that arise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I apologize, I don't have a list of who's speaking when and which order, so if whoever wants to come up first, that would be great. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Ting, members of the committee. I'm Matt Snyder of department staff. I'm going to just give you a very quick overview of the proposals before you. The proposals before you are general plan amendments and planning code map amendments in association with Candlestick Point, Hunters Point Shipyard Phase 2 development project. This project, of course, is within 2 redevelopment project areas, as you can see. On the screen, very quickly, Hunters Point Shipyard redevelopment project area is comprised of 2 phases. Phase 1 is currently under construction and partially complete. Phase 2 is what we're going to be focusing on today. Candlestick Point is within the Bayview Hunters Point redevelopment project area. It was in its current form, was created in 2006. It's divided into 2 zones. Zone 1 is the Candlestick Point area for which OCII has jurisdiction. Zone 2 is the rest of the Bayview Hunters Point area in its project area, and it falls under the jurisdiction of the planning code and the planning commission. When we created this project, when it received its master entitlements 10 years ago, or excuse me, in 2010, we understood that this project was going to be under the jurisdiction of OCII, and the key implementing document and the key regulatory document for these, of course, are the redevelopment plans for the shipyard and for the Bayview, respectively. However, what we also wanted to make sure we did when we did the master entitlements is that we wanted to make sure that the general plan, the planning code, and all of them were in sync and expressed the vision of this project. So we created, at that time, sub-area plans or area plans for the 2 areas respectively, and we created special use districts for the 2 plans, all under the jurisdiction of the planning code and the general plan, and we wanted to make sure that they all sync together. As you know, the project originally envisioned enabling the 49ers to stay in San Francisco at a new stadium on the shipyard as a part of the full reshuffling of the land uses. That, of course, did not come to be as they moved to Santa Clara. There were some provisions within the original approvals that had some different scenario developments able to happen. However, those development scenarios were not as refined and developed in the same level as the stadium. Thus, 5 Points, along with OCII, are now proposing some modifications to that project. The projects, we have it on the screen now. So the shipyard is where you see the most dramatic physical changes. Of course, we're no longer accommodating the stadium and its radial grid of streets. Instead, we're looking to incorporate a mix of land uses, both housing and job-creating office and R&D uses within the previous location of the stadium. They've re-envisioned the entire shipyard with the help of Sir David Adjaye, better connecting the different neighborhoods together into a single project. On the land use side, and you'll hear a much more thorough presentation of these redevelopment amendments tomorrow, along with the rejiggering of the proposal. In terms of land use, if you look at the totality of the Candlestick Point, the 2 phases of the shipyard, you'll see that the land uses are going to be, there's pretty much going to be a wash in terms of what they're now proposed developing. The housing units will remain as they are between the 3 plan areas. And then if you look at the non-residential uses, the office R&D on one hand, and then all the institutional community-related uses, it generally comes out to about the same as what they're proposing to develop. As I noted, the proposal, the really key documents for regulating these developments are the redevelopment plans, and you'll hear that tomorrow as you sit as the committee as a whole. However, we are making conforming amendments to the things for which we have jurisdiction, and I will describe them very quickly in terms of the geography. On the Candlestick side, originally there was a parcel that's westward and uphill from the previous stadium site that we refer to as the Jamestown parcel. This parcel is owned by the San Francisco 49ers, and when they were part of that project, we envisioned this to be a part of that as well. The 10,500 units that are to be developed through the totality of the site, if this were a part of that project, some of those 10,500 units would be included in this parcel. Because the 49ers are no longer a part of the equation, through a mutual agreement of planning, OCII, and the property owner, is what we're recommending is that we take that parcel out of the redevelopment plan so that it can develop under the planning code and under our jurisdiction. And there is general consensus about that move. And so for today, we're also amending the special use district under the planning code and the sub-area plan for Candlestick to make sure that they all sync. On the Hunters Point Shipyard side, we're just simply taking out any references in that area plan that refer to the stadium, and then that we're just also amending all of our graphics within that area plan, taking out indications of the stadium and making sure that they sync again with the new vision for the shipyard. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. I am now going to turn it over to Nadia Sasay, Executive Director of OCII, who will talk about amendments to the housing plan. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Nadia Sasay, Executive Director of the Office of Community Investment and Infrastructure. I'd like to have SFGov TV, please. Thank you, Matt. I'm here today to talk about one other change in the project, this time relating to the Candlestick Point site. So while OCII, the city, and the developer have all been working on changes to the shipyard plan, the developer has been actively working to bring housing and commercial uses to Candlestick. Part of that effort includes mixed-use development in the second phase, subphase of Candlestick, where the developer is proposing to do a mixed-use block of housing, hotel, and film and art centers uses. As with all residential development in the entire project, on-site inclusionary is required between a minimum of 5% and a maximum of 20%. For one block in this subphase, the developer is proposing to meet that inclusionary requirement by creating a standalone affordable rental project which would serve low-income seniors. This would be a standalone inclusionary project estimated to be about 104 units that would serve senior households up to 60% AMI. By grouping these units together in one senior project, which would be primarily one-bedroom units, it would allow the developer to bring greater number of BMR units online in this location within what would otherwise have occurred. It does not create a net new BMR units. Instead, it advances 62 units that would otherwise have been built over time. Additionally, it would mean that the residential units in the subphase would have at least about 25% inclusionary exceeding the maximum, which is currently at 20%. As you can see on the table, the 3,345 total BMR doesn't change, but rather 104 units of the developer's inclusionary category would shift to this lower AMI senior rental tier. Feedback from the Bayview Hunters Point community, particularly from the Hunters Point Shipyard CAC, has included a desire for senior-focused housing serving lower incomes. The developer will partner with a nonprofit and local Southeast providers on the development and senior services. This concludes our presentation. Representatives from 5 Point, OCII, and Planning are available to answer any questions you may have. And we also have the president of the Hunters Point CAC also present, Dr. Honeycutt, as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Safai.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Director Sasay. I actually have a few questions for you. So I think it's wonderful that you're building senior housing. I think it's much in need. We have a significant aging population, and I know in my district we have a lot of seniors aging in place. I know in Bayview Hunters Point we have to share a very similar demographic in that regard. Are there other senior units that are going to be built, or is this the only standalone senior project in the entire redevelopment area?
For purposes of the Candlestick Point and Hunters Point Shipyard Phase 2, what you're approving today is the only one that we know of.
Yeah, but still, it's great. It's
It
great
is.
because the amount of money that I know they used to do Section 202, they used to have money set aside specifically for seniors, but that funding is no longer available. So it's wonderful that developer and the CAC made this a priority, given the lack of that type of housing. So that was one of the questions. The other thing that I wanted to know is that, and Supervisor Kim and I and Supervisor Tang and the entire board work for a lot of time on working on the inclusionary numbers and the percentages. And I understand that the tax credit goes up to, the money goes up to the 60% threshold or 65% threshold. But while I'm looking at the allocation itself, there's still a gap in there between that 60 and 80% AMI of folks that are being served. And so and we had a lot of conversations about that over the course of the last year. We have folks that are janitors, hotel workers, folks that are in the service industry that make just a little bit too much to qualify for the tax credit units, but then they can't afford the ones that are up in the higher levels. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to ask you for future consideration as you're working with the CAC and working with the OCI Commission, if you can continue these conversations to look at how you might be able to, and I know that the tax credit program allows you to go up to 70% AMI, because we're doing 2 projects like that in our district currently. And we're working with the Mayor's Office of Housing because we can push the number a little bit higher in a small area to deliver units into that category. And I think that I'm not here to tell the Citizens Advisory Committee or the development team or your office, but I would like you to continue to have those conversations as the plan moves forward, along with Supervisor Cohen's office, because it just jumped out at me on the page that 60 to 80%. And we do have brackets and we do have some areas that we can still fulfill that when you're doing that 80 to 120, but still it's not going to be targeted in that 60 to 80% range. So I just wanted to ask you to continue to look at that as this moves forward.
Be happy to.
I was about to call you Supervisor Cohen.
No, thank you for the promotion. But your comments are definitely well received, and we appreciate you taking so much time to dive deeply into who and at what level AMI will be serving. I just wanted to say that the supervisor was very intentional and definitely listened to what community members and the Shipyard CAC recommended. And, you know, while we talk about that missing middle a lot, we can't really approach this with in a one-dimensional approach, because for Bayview Hunters Point, the median income is not reflective of the overall city median income.
Sure.
So for us, for our district and our constituents, 55% AMI citywide is actually captures over half of our neighborhood population.
That's great.
So we want to make sure that we're not reaching over the neighborhood when we build affordable housing, and that affordable is affordable to the people in our district.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And again, I just want to congratulate from my own perspective. We don't have the opportunity to build the middle income units. And so the 80 to 120 and even the 140 to 160, you're talking about for the audience's, information, you're talking about a first-year teacher, a first-year nurse, a first-year firefighter, and a spouse or a partner. And so those 809 and 892 units, those are really, really important, and it sounds like you're dealing with the bulk of the need in your district. I am only putting it out there for conversation for you all to under consideration, along with 5 Points, OCII, and the CAC, to say, that just jumps off the page at me, and if there's a way that you can continue that conversation, knowing that there's flexibility in the tax credit program, it would still be 100% affordable, it would still fall under all the guidelines, but you would be serving a small segment, and I think that population, as in my district, is represented in your district.
Absolutely.
Of those in the service industry.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Safai. I think both you and the supervisor's offices bring up really great points. So I'm guessing that, at least on the chart that we have, it just shows the BMR categories, but is there anywhere else in the project at all that has a 60 to 80% AMI range for housing, or this is pretty much it? This is it. Okay. So anyway, I think points well taken here that was stated by Supervisor Safai. Okay, so with that next, I mean, I do have the Controller's Office economic analysis, so perhaps we could go to that.
Oh, here it is.
SF Gov TV, we'd like to use the overhead.
Oh, here we go.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Asim Khan. I'm with the senior
Do you
economist
mind
with the
speaking
Controller's
into the
Office.
microphone? Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
And you
Yeah.
can use that one if it's easier for you.
Okay. We'll see, whatever works best. So I'm not gonna go through all, I'm gonna just briefly describe the project, and what's the impetus for all. There are actually 4 related ordinances which are kind of related to the facilitation of this Candlestick Hunters Point shipyard redevelopment project and the Bayview Hunters Point redevelopment plan. So one of the major impetus was because in 2006, the 49ers initially proposed to build a football stadium in on the Candlestick Point in San Francisco. However, they later decided to build the stadium, which is now known as the Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara exactly 4 years ago. So that kind of is the reason, one of the major reasons why the proposed legislation are making some changes to the project, because it's a now non-stadium alternative. And under that, because Mr. Snyder also mentioned some of those things, about the Jamestown parcel, that's one of the major changing from Zone 1, which is generally known as the Candlestick Point lot, and that area, to the Zone 2, which will be under the Bayview Hunters Point redevelopment plan. And so I'm going to go through what really matters from our perspective and not go through all these details. But this is the slide I would like to focus, because this is where you'll see some of the impact of this legislation, these legislations. The total redevelopment plan proposed changes, if you include both the phase 1 and phase 2, actually there is no net change if you compare it with the 2010 versus 2018. The changes you will see, there's a change column, and you can see each unit by residential units. There is no change overall. And what changes is the R&D and office space would, under the redevelopment plan now, would be reduced from 5.1 million square feet to 4.4 million square feet. And that's 735,000, which was already mentioned by the previous presenter, that will be now redistributed to the hotel, regional retail, neighborhood retail, and other uses. But the overall, there is no net change from our perspective. So how does this impact makes a difference in our impact analysis? So we looked at, although there is no overall change, but the driving force behind these changes is the disposition and development agreement with the OCCI. And the developer, how they're going to change from. So we compare what was going to happen in 2010 under the non-stadium alternative and what's going to happen now under 2018. And you can see overall the residential units change from 10,500 to 10,672. But this 172, which I'll explain a little bit later, actually is shifting from the phase 1 of the project to the phase 2. So. And then if you look at the other commercial uses, so overall, we're going to gain about 2 million, little over 2 million square feet of total commercial space. Originally, under the plan, what was allowed under the redevelopment plan, under the DDA was only 3.1 million. They were not really maximizing the potential of that site. But now they will be maximizing out to 4.4 million. So there is some changes in the land uses and the distribution, which makes this, from our perspective, material, changes. So let me go through this Jamestown parcel, which will make a difference also. So this is one of the major change in this is the change in the lot from Zone 1, which is on a Candlestick Point, to Zone 2, which is 6.8 acres in total. And this lot was kind of in a strange, it was supposed to build about 325 units, but it was all included in the 10,500 maximum cap of the project. So it was part of that cap. But now under this zoning change, it's being shifted from Zone 1 to Zone 2, and now it can be developed as a separate project. So we are talking to the planning department. So we estimated that there are an additional 300 units can be built on that site, aside from the project, which was 10,500 units, plus 172, which was shifting from phase 1 to phase 2. So having said all that, if you look at this is the summary of including the Jamestown parcel, what would actually change. So it will give you the breakdown of all these changes. And so we are actually going to get through these changes at the zoning level and 300 additional residential units, and we're going to get 2.1 million square feet of office space due to these changes. So from our perspective, what drives the economic impact? There are two major economic factors which will impact the local economy. This rezoning and the land use changes will increase the residential, as I said earlier, residential and the commercial potential. And this will likely put a downward pressure on the prices and rents for the residential and commercial real estate across the city compared to what had it not been happening. So it's just a relative to that. And this will, of course, will drive the investment activity following this rezoning, and the development agreement will generate additional construction activity. So we, as I mentioned earlier, this basically we're analyzing the difference between what was going to happen in 2010 versus what's going to happen to 2018. So it's not the impact of the total project by itself, but the difference in the development potentials. So the impact of new housing, as I mentioned earlier, it will put a downward pressure on the housing prices of these additional 300 units. So we estimate that the impact of this would be on the general housing prices would be 0.12%. And of course, if you have, this is not the impact of, as I mentioned earlier, of all the total project, if you had considered the total project output impact would be 4.4% on the housing prices relative to if it has not happened. I'm talking about 10,800 units rather than the 300 units. And one of the things we also looked at what we call affordable housing subsidy from the people. These additional 300 units at 18% inclusionary requirement would generate 54 units, affordable unit, BMR unit. So we estimate that on average, a household occupying those units would benefit roughly around $7,000 per year in terms of the rental costs. They will be reducing their rental costs. So the value of that subsidy for 54 units is about $4.4 million annually when all these units will be built. On the commercial side, this additional 2.1 million square feet of additional commercial space would also put a downward pressure on the commercial rents and prices. And so we estimate that the overall decline in the commercial rents would be about 1.4% as a result of this additional space created by this change. So this 1.4% decline in the rent is actually a combined relative weighted average of the rent across retail, office, and what they call R&D and office space, and other non-retail, non-residential uses. So the value of all these rents, so to put things in perspective, the value of these rents decline would be $140 million annually. So compared to what they had that not happened, they would have paid $140 million more in rents than, so this $140 million is essentially a saving. So we model all these changes in what we use. This is a RAMI simulation model, which is basically an econometric input-output model for our simulation purposes. And this is a forecasting tool. And I'm not going to go through all the inputs. As I mentioned, the value of these different rent for office space and retail and the commercial is, if you look at the bottom three numbers, you will see this, they'll add up to $140 million, and the value of non-residential investment is roughly $1.3 billion, and non-residential, and the value of the residential is about $270 million. So we modeled this, and I'm going to talk about what's the actual the impact of all this legislation, what's going to happen. So when all said and done, when we ran the simulation, so the impact of this change is 560, roughly 560 more jobs in the city. This is a citywide impact, and it's at the build out. And the population would be 852, and the GDP and output all will change. GDP and output of the local economy will be increased by 163 million at the build out. And so if you look at from the other another economic variable which will be important, change in the personal disposable income per capita. On average, because of the decrease in the housing prices and the more employment and all that, when all said and done, they will gain on a per capita basis $7, and when you include the housing prices, a small change in the housing prices after the simulation is all completed is $6. So overall, the impact of this legislation is all net positive. This will be good, and so. I'm ready to basically answer any questions you might have, or feel free.
Okay.
I'm done.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions, comments? We know this is a project long time in the making, started probably around when I was in 7th grade, so I know that we are, yes, I know that you're all eager to see this passed. Okay, so with that said, Supervisor Safai.
Thank you, Chair. Last time we were asking some very technical questions on the plan, and I wanted to take the opportunity to I know we're going to open up for public comment, but, almost the very first day I came to San Francisco, I was sitting in an office in the planning department, and it was almost 20 years ago, and there was a journal article, it was a local newspaper article, and it was all about this project and how many years and time it's been in the making. And so I see a lot of friends, I see a lot of leaders in this audience. I see people that have dedicated the vast majority of their career to seeing this get done. And I have to say, this has the potential to be one of the most, and will be, one of the most impactful projects as it continues to move forward. And it's extremely, extremely exciting. And I want to recognize organized labor. I want to recognize community members that have dedicated their entire career, Citizen Advisory Committee members. I want to recognize 5 points. I want to recognize the 2 supervisors' office, because it's only been 2, right? I mean, really over the last 20 years that have guided this to the finish line, particularly Supervisor Cohen, seeing the changes that happened in 2010 when she came in, and now here we are in 2018. I mean, it almost is pretty unbelievable that we've made it to this point after all these years. Folks in city staff, I see city staff that have been working on this for a good portion of their career. So this is a really, really phenomenal project. The commitments that were made, I know Supervisor Kim is very proud of the work that she has been able to do in her district, about 40 being the new 30. Well, 33% was negotiated in this district years ago. and that is pretty phenomenal. I mean, we were nitpicking over AMIs, but the specificity of AMI that were put in to help deal with members of the community that have been overlooked and forgotten for a significant amount of time was pretty forward-thinking, along with the agreements made with labor, the project labor agreements, and all of the specificity that went into that. So this is a very detailed effort. There's a lot of people that will benefit from that, but the city in San Francisco should be proud of what's put forward today, and I'm really happy to be a part of this. So thank you for everyone in the audience that was involved in this.
Thank you, Supervisor Safai, and I definitely want to echo my thanks as well. So at this time, if there's nothing else, then perhaps we can go to public comment first, as I know there's a lot of people eager here to speak on items 3 through 5. Please come on up.
I want to start off by answering your question pertaining to making sure everybody has a housing opportunity and can afford to live in an apartment complex. SF viewer, please. Right here, where you claim that 60% of the AMI and below, during that section in the income requirement of people that's looking for housing, you have to include that people whose income is below the 60% of the API, I believe that's like about 50 or 60, maybe $70,000 a year. So in order to include the people that are most vulnerable, who are homeless and economically disadvantaged, and our veterans who are living off Social Security benefits, permanent disability income, you have to make that low percent, below 60%, 30% of the tenant's income. Very much so in the same way that the Community Housing Partnership and the Tenderloin Development Organization charges their low-income tenants in order to have a place to live in their organization. Now, I'm pretty upset now. You're jumping the gun. You've got numerous people that complained about the contamination of Shipyard at Hunters Point. You've got people that's filed a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit because of being exposed to radioactive material because of cancer surgery and cancer birth defects by people that's living on this land. You also have people that have died at Treasure Island because of Tetra Tech, so you're jumping the gun. You're putting profit over safety. Until you can prove that that land is not contaminated and up to code, you're jumping the gun. And the latest set of news is it's been proven that dirt was taken from that land to Pittsburgh. Now the people in Pittsburgh, which is predominantly white, complaining about it.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. I'm a resident of the Bayview Hunters Point area, and finally, after all these years, the fate of building 813 looks like it's settled. The maker spaces have the potential to be very successful, especially with the presence of other businesses and all the footwork from the hotel that it will bring. This is great for the community and new emerging businesses. As a resident, I wholeheartedly support this plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. The community benefits delivered by 5 points is unprecedented. They advanced $45 million towards the Alice Griffith housing development, $30 million to the commercial kitchen, and $16 million in payments to community organizations and projects. That's over $91 million, people, in community benefits, and they haven't received any revenues, no payback as of yet. We need to move this process forward for housing, jobs, and the economic benefits these amendments will bring. There should be no delay. I'm asking you to support and approve these amendments today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Joyce Armstrong. I'm president of the the proud president of the Public Housing Tenant Association. which represents 11 developments, which include Hope SF, Hope 6, and the new RAD properties for the families in San Francisco. I voted yes on both Prop G in 2008 and Prop O in 2016, or whenever it was, I don't remember. We had just got back into town, so forgive me. Neola and I had to get off the plane and go do this stuff. As well as the majority of San Francisco residents who don't even live in the Bayview Hunters Point. Everything I've heard is an improvement on the existing plan, while bringing the DDA in alignment with the redevelopment plan. I really like the BMR, housing for seniors, of which I'm one. I just turned 70 on the 25th of May. And we need more seniors. I don't even know how I'm surviving. And I worked for Housing Authority in Petro Hill Neighborhood House for many years. Without low-income housing, I couldn't live here. I encourage the commission to join me in supporting the amendments to the DDA. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you, Asha.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Eloise Patton. I'm a lifelong resident of Bayview Hunters Point, and I am also a member of several governing bodies within the community. I won't bore you with my resume. I wanted to speak out on something that we haven't spoken about too often, the difference between Phase 1 and Phase 2. All of us as community residents are concerned about contamination in the shipyard. However, we need to understand that these amendments have been voted on, and much of what we're talking about is for Phase 2, which will be around for the Candlestick development. I, for one, want to see this project move forward before I leave this earth. When it started, I would say when I started being an advocate in the project, I was about 28 to 30 years old. I'm 60 years old now, and it's time for this project to move forward. We have done due diligence. This is for Phase 2. The voters have spoken. It is done. We absolutely are advocating for the health of the community, but we are also advocating for the community benefit, the jobs, and the housing that we've been talking about for over 30 years. I encourage you to approve these amendments and with no delay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors Michael Terrio, San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Council. As Supervisor Safai did, I want to acknowledge the folks from the building trades in the room. We have representation from the carpenters, the operating engineers, the plumbers and pipe fitters, District Council 16, painters and allied trades, the bricklayers, and the iron workers. I don't think I've missed anybody. Oh, sheet metal workers. Pardon me, sheet metal workers also. We are actually grateful for the increased scrutiny of the cleanup of this project. It's our members who are going to be working there once the project once the larger part of the project goes into construction. And yet, eventually, there has to be a plan in place for that. That is what you have before us. It is a very handsome plan. It is a plan, I think, that is especially admirable because it contains an industrial component that was not there before, 400,000 plus square feet of blue-collar work. This was traditionally a blue-collar employment hub in San Francisco. It won't quite be to that point with this, but there's something there for long-term blue-collar employment as well. It has been a long time in the making, certainly before my time, even in my position, and I'm about to retire from my position. So please, let's move this along and get it done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to speak. Good afternoon, Chair Tang and Supervisors Kim and Asha Safai. My name is Dr. Veronica Honeycutt, and I'm the chair of the CAC for the Shipyard. I want us to take a moment to think about what this project is going to bring. And Supervisor Safai, thank you so much for telling folks that this has been a project long in the making. It has taken a lot of time to get to this point. When it unfolds, we've approved, the CAC, of course, has approved the new plan with these great improvements, a STEM, STEAM high school, a great senior product at the Candlestick Point area, more parks and open space, a historic preservation program, housing in the range from 0 to 160 AMI, front-loaded affordable programs, AG as an example, and Pacific Point in the Shipyard as an example, 1/3 of the entire project being affordable. And the focus of today is on amendments on the BMI Senior Project and removing the 49ers parcel out of the project. Okay, so let's focus on getting this done. Everything has been approved by a number of entities, the Commission on Community Investment and Infrastructure, the Planning Commission, the San Francisco Metropolitan Transportation Authority Board, the OCII Oversight Board. I want you to know it's been through all of this. We need you to please move this project forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Supervisors, Tim Paulson. I'm with the San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Council now. I was very proud so many years ago to sit down when I was the executive director of the San Francisco Labor Council to, at that time, hash out probably the most comprehensive community benefit agreement in the country for a project to this stake. People have talked about, now we're going sometimes to 40%, but this was the first one in San Francisco that went to 35%. I do want to say, both on behalf of, well, I should only say on behalf of the Building Trades Council, where I'm working now, that, you know, our members and frankly the entire labor community, you know, is very concerned about, you know, some of the mistakes that maybe were made in the cleanup, and we absolutely are going to support getting that done. And we're appalled if there's anything that didn't happen that was supposed to. But at the same time, this project still has to move forward. So we do support these amendments. We'll be proud to continue to be here to support this very exciting project.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Corey Smith on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. I really do want to reiterate a lot of what everyone else has already said. Certainly concerned about the contamination, but we do know that remediation does work. Once done safely and properly, we will get to a better place. You know, Supervisor Safai's comments regarding the AMI levels, I think we're in such agreement that everybody needs help in this city, and we need to make sure we continue to find opportunities and really appreciate this project's wide range. And then lastly, the idea of bringing low-income senior housing up front and bringing it faster than it would have been otherwise is just the absolute model we need to be doing for all phase projects. This and everything else coming through the pipeline, if we can get housing online quicker and even maximize subsidized affordable housing online quicker, we need to go through every single avenue to make sure that that happens. Again, speaking in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. And if any other members of the public who wish to comment on this, please do line on up.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Tang, Safai, and Kim. Linda Fedeke Richardson, a longtime Bayview Hunters Point resident. And in addition to everything you've heard, I think the takeaway at the end of today is for all of you and those that are watching at home to know that the Hunters Point Candlestick Project is the only project in the history of San Francisco that has even done beyond the call of duty. I know that Supervisor Jane Kim and I share a passion on Treasure Island. We are going to use that, you know, HPS as a gold standard in terms of workforce development, in terms of housing, in terms of open space, the best design. There is no other project in the city that we have right now that can match that, and that's why the amendment you are having is just the concept of what could happen in the shipyard. And as the previous speaker mentioned, all city agencies, including the Planning Commission, which I used to be a former planning commissioner, also has endorsed that. So your blessing today, again, is to convey the shipyard will be clean. We know that. We have all the people that are capable to make it happen. And we believe in this project. The people in Bayview Hunters Point believe in this project because it is the only economic engine for the Southeast sector that all of you are beholding and obligated to make happen. So we trust at the end of the day that you will give us your blessing. And again, thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the public who wish to comment on this item? Okay, seeing none. Just a lot of people here who want to see these amendments through. So with that, I will close public comment. Supervisor Kim?
Thank you. I want to save my comments for after public comment, but I do want to congratulate the many stakeholders that have been involved in Candlestick Point and Hunters Point. And it's actually, I think, really heartening to see Phase 1 move along. This is a huge development which involves a lot of infrastructure and a lot of investment. It's not easy to do. And so I do just want to acknowledge that that Phase 1 has been moving along. I'm very happy to see that. It's actually exceeded my expectations of what I thought was possible out of a major master plan. Just having seen Mission Bay over the last, 28 years, and Treasure Island, I just really appreciate how difficult it is to build not just one building, but an entire new neighborhood. The one feedback that I had given to Ms. Sase when I was briefed on this last week is just that my hope that as Phase 2 moves forward, that we do consider if we can build more housing in Phase 2. I'm not asking for it today. I'm just asking for it to be considered. I know that there was an EIR, that it was maxed out at the, I think, 12,100 units of housing. And so in order to build more housing, we would have to open up the EIR. So I'm not suggesting that we do that now. But as the future of retail in particular, I think, moves into a really, into a question that we could not have even predicted 5 years ago. I think that I would love to see us study whether some of that retail and hotel could be considered for housing. I just think that our needs have changed today than they have even 10 years ago when this plan was originally approved. At the time, a mall made sense. A mall even made sense 5 years ago. Now, it's not clear to me that it's a viable use in this neighborhood or really anywhere in San Francisco. And so it's the perfect opportunity to see if we have an opportunity to build more housing on available land, which is something that we greatly and everyone acknowledges that we need to see more of. So my only ask was that this be considered as we move along in Phase 2. No changes today. But I am really glad to see that we were able to amend Phase 2 in a way that could move this forward today. So I'm happy to support this, moving this out of Land Use Committee.
Thank you very much. And just want to agree with all those comments. So really the package of 3 pieces of legislation that we have here today, just to summarize for everyone, is just one having to do with the parcel that is owned by the 49ers and severing that part out from our city's project here, changing the low income, the below market rate unit mix for the seniors specifically, the 104 units, and allowing that to move forward more quickly, and to change the requisite dedication for BMR units in that respect, as well as shifting some of the square footage from shifting it from R&D and office over to hotel, retail, and institutional instead. I do agree with Supervisor Kim in terms of wanting to build as much housing as we possibly can, but I also do believe in sort of the whole community and making sure that the people who live there also have access to great amenities as well, because that's really important, especially so far out in our city. So that was just to summarize the major changes that we have to make today for these 3 pieces of legislation, and of course the requisite general plan amendments that go along with it. So any other questions, comments from our colleagues?
I just want to state one more
Supervisor
thing.
Kim?
It's not part of our hearing today, but it's related, and I just want to congratulate or thank staff for their advocacy. Ensuring that we are going to test Parcel A. This is dovetailing with a previous hearing that was held at the Government Audit and Oversight Committee. Even if the data and all of the work demonstrates to the scientists and the experts that there is no kind of environmental concerns or health concerns for those residents, I think that just providing that additional assurance to our residents really goes a long way. So I just want to thank everyone that was involved in getting to an agreement that we retest Parcel A. I just think giving our residents that assurance just goes a long way and matters a lot. So that was finally it. So I'll make a motion to move this forward as a committee report with recommendation to the full board.
Okay, great. And that would be items 3 through 5 together. Okay, we'll do that without objection. Congratulations. Thank you very much. All right. All right. And with that, Mr. Clerk, are there any other items before us today?
There is no further business.
Thank you. We are adjourned.